Come to scene 2 of the act, and I'm simply calling scene 2 the work. This is the bulk of the gospel accounts that tell the life of Christ, really during a 3 to 3.5 year period of time. From the time that Jesus is 30 to roughly the time he's 33 and a half, he does the work that the Father has sent him to do. And so scene 2 becomes the work. One of the ways to, I think again, as you read through the Gospels, even just reading one of the Gospels, a lot happens. I mean, you're sort of moving from incident to incident, and again, it can be kind of hard to get some sort of a handle around the work of Christ or the ministry of Christ. And one of the ways that is helpful to think about it is that along with chronology in terms of how things fall into place in his ministry, and by the way, Luke specifically states in his opening statements about writing the Gospel of Luke, and Luke was not one of the disciples. Luke was a physician. He is the traveling companion of the Apostle Paul, and part of the criteria for inclusion in the Scriptures, authority in the New Testament Scriptures, was that it required apostolic authorship. Someone that was recognized as having apostolic authority, being responsible for the writing. Well, Luke didn't have apostolic authority, but Paul did. And most scholars believe that Luke's gospel, in a sense, fell under the authority of Paul. And Luke was a physician, and Luke says what he did. He said, there's various stories going on about what Jesus did, and I have carefully investigated them so that you would know. And there's this sense that Luke's gospel is very orderly and chronological compared to Matthew. Matthew is a teacher. He has the gift of teaching. And if you look at Matthew's gospel, he takes big chunks of material and kind of puts it together. So you have all of the parables sort of bunched together in Matthew. And really, there's some question whether the material in the Sermon on the Mount was all really presented at one place, or whether it wasn't some kind of a compilation pulled together. But it's not chronological. His gospel, generally it is, but it's not like Luke's that really kind of follows in order. But when you look at the ministry of Christ chronologically, it's easier to put it together if you mix chronology with geography. And so really, the ministry of Christ, most scholars break down into 4 primary periods of ministry. The first is usually referred to as the early Judean period. And the early Judean period is only found in the Gospel of John. So this is one of those periods of time where you really need John to supplement Luke. And the early Judean period of ministry in John is contained in the first 4 chapters. And we're so glad that we have that, because it not only gives us some of the great encounters, it also helps me understand why when Jesus was in Galilee and called the disciples, "Come follow me," and they dropped everything and left him, sometimes you think, well, how does that work? Well, the reality is that they'd had encounter with him in this earlier period of time, and we see some of that in John's gospel, so that by the time Christ calls them into this very technical and official relationship of a rabbi and his disciples, his students, they'd had some exposure to Jesus. And so this early period of time helps us understand that. A number of things happen. And again, John doesn't get into this, so now you have to take bits and pieces and put it together. But we do know that first you have John the Baptist. And John the Baptist, by the way, is a transitional figure that ties us right back to the end of the Old Testament. Because the last statement of the Old Testament in Malachi is the prophecy that before the coming of the great and terrible day of the Lord, what will happen? I will send the prophet Elijah. In my little blog article, I point out that had to be tricky to understand, because Elijah lived 400 years before Malachi. And, of course, Elijah is one of a couple of guys in the Bible that never died physically. One is Enoch, clear back at the beginning, that we're told was kind of translated, we think. Again, kind of an early rapture practice for those of you that are familiar with the concept. And the other is Elijah. And Elijah did not die physically. He was caught up in the sight of Elisha by the chariot of God and in a whirlwind, chariots of fire and a whirlwind, and just taken, and he was gone. And so he's gone, but now you have Malachi saying that he's going to come again. And then you have this 400-year block of time, and the first thing you see in the synoptics, at least, is you see John the Baptist. And we're told in Mark, which is the earliest of the Gospels, if you tie Malachi and Mark together, and let me step aside, because the other two you can tie together are John and Genesis, which put Acts 1 and 2 together. But if you tie Mark and Malachi together, Mark starts out and quotes from the prophet Isaiah, that the voice, and John the Baptist came in the wilderness, the voice of one crying in the wilderness, prepare ye the way of the Lord. And later, Jesus specifically says that he fulfilled the promise that he was the Elijah that was to come. And so now you've got Acts 1 and 2 tied together, bridging this gap of 400 years, and John the Baptist coming, and of course, baptizing people in the wilderness of Judea, and Jesus comes, and in fulfillment of all righteousness, is baptized, and we have this experience of the Spirit coming down upon him in the form of a dove, and then immediately the voice of the Father saying, this is my beloved Son, and with him I am well pleased, and immediately the Spirit drives him out into the wilderness, and for 40 days he's tempted by the devil.